The sun had barely climbed above the horizon when the dust of the prairie shimmered like golden mist. The wind carried the scent of wild sage and worn leather through the open plains, where silence often spoke louder than words. Tate Colson, a rancher known more for his quiet strength than his smile, stood by the barn door tightening the straps on an old brown horse. His hands, rough and scarred from years of work, moved with the kind of precision that only came from habit. He didn't expect visitors that morning. He didn't expect change. But sometimes, life doesn't ask for permission before it walks through your gate. Down the dirt road came a small wagon pulled by a weary mule. The wheels creaked, the mule snorted. And on the seat sat a young woman, hat tilted low, eyes hidden, clutching a wooden box against her chest as if it held her heart inside. She was no ranch hand, that much was clear. Her clothes were travel-worn, her hair messy from miles of wind. But there was something else, a kind of quiet determination in the way she sat. Tate watched her pull the wagon to a stop. She looked at him, unsure, then at the barn, then back at him again. "You the one selling the saddle?" she asked softly. Her voice trembled slightly. But it wasn't fear, it was hesitation. Like someone who'd said too many goodbyes lately. "I am," Tate said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You looking to buy?" She nodded and climbed down from the wagon. "It's for my horse." "Well, my father's horse. He passed last month." She looked away for a moment. The old saddle broke, and this one looked just like his. Tate nodded slowly. "Sorry to hear that." He walked toward the barn and lifted a saddle from the rack, polished but old, built from real hide and iron buckles. "This one's been around a while. Strong as ever, though. Might be a bit small for a bigger horse." The woman smiled faintly. "That's okay. The horse is small, too." She brushed the dust from her skirt and took the saddle in her hands. It was heavier than she expected. Tate stepped closer, his shadow falling across hers. "Want to try it on?" he asked. She nodded. Together they walked toward the mule. The creature flicked its ears, clearly unimpressed by the idea of being saddled again. Tate lifted the saddle and held it for a moment, studying the girth and frame. The woman watched him silently, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her hat. Then she whispered, almost shyly, "It looks too small. Will it fit?" Tate froze for a second. The wind whistled between the barn doors, the sky brightening just enough to catch the gold in her hair. He turned to her, his blue eyes steady, calm, unhurried. And then, with a soft smile that could have melted the morning frost, he said, "It'll fit just fine." And somehow, it did. The saddle rested perfectly, the straps snug and balanced. The mule gave one stubborn snort but stood still under the weight, as if accepting that some things in life simply belonged where they were meant to. The woman laughed lightly, a sound that cut through the silence like music. "Guess you were right," she said. Tate shrugged with a half-smile. "Usually am." There was a pause, the kind that felt like it could stretch forever. She looked around the ranch, the broken fence, the empty corral, the fading paint on the barn. "You run this place all by yourself?" "Mostly," Tate replied. "Was my father's before mine. Ain't easy, but nothing worth keeping ever is." She looked at him, a mix of curiosity and admiration in her eyes. "You remind me of him," she said. "Your father?" She nodded. "He used to say the same thing. Nothing worth keeping ever is. He taught me how to ride, how to work with my hands. But I never quite learned how to stay." Tate studied her for a long moment. "Maybe you just didn't find a reason to." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something fragile, yet steady, like the first flicker of a campfire in the cold night. Before long, the woman paid for the saddle. But she didn't seem in a hurry to leave. She asked about the horses, about the land, about the old stories carved into the wooden beams of the ranch house. Tate answered, not with words alone, but with stories, small ones, honest ones, about storms survived, calves delivered, and nights spent watching lightning crawl across the horizon. Hours passed unnoticed. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them. A rancher and a stranger. Standing in a moment neither had planned for. As the sun began to dip, the woman looked toward the road again. "I should go," she said softly. Tate nodded, though his chest tightened at the thought. "You'll be all right." She smiled. "I always am." Then she paused, her hand resting on the saddle one last time. "Thank you, Tate. For making it fit." He nodded, watching as she climbed into the wagon. The mule started forward, the wheels creaking again, carrying her away down the dusty road. But as she disappeared into the distance, Tate found himself staring at the horizon, heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. Something about her lingered, the sound of her laugh, the glint of sunlight in her eyes, the echo of her words. And deep down, he knew this wasn't the last time he'd see her. Because sometimes, fate doesn't knock once. It circles back until the right moment comes around again. The wind carried the whisper of her voice back through the open plains. "Too small. Will it fit?" And his answer hung in the air like a promise, "It'll fit just fine." 3 weeks passed since the stranger's wagon disappeared down that dusty road, leaving only a trail of wind and memory behind. The ranch felt quieter than usual, not because it ever bustled with noise, but because something in Tate Colson's chest had gone still. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, fed the horses, mended fences, and worked until his hands ached, but no matter how much he tried to lose himself in the rhythm of ranch life, his mind always wandered back to her. The woman with the tired eyes and the soft voice. The one who'd asked, "Will it fit?" And somehow made the question feel like it meant everything. The days rolled on. Autumn began to whisper through the air. The wind grew colder, and the sky turned the color of old whiskey at dusk. Tate had seen seasons change all his life, but this one felt different. It felt like something was waiting to happen. One evening, as he was fixing a broken fence by the north pasture, he heard it, the faint creak of wagon wheels. His hammer froze mid-swing. He turned slowly toward the dirt road that wound down through the valley. A wagon was coming. The same mule. The same wooden box. And there she was. She looked smaller somehow, maybe it was the evening light. Or maybe it was the way her shoulders slumped from exhaustion. When she stopped the wagon by the gate, Tate didn't say a word. He just watched her climb down, her boots sinking softly into the dirt. "You again," he said finally, a quiet grin tugging at his lips. "Me again," she replied, smiling faintly. "Hope you don't mind." Tate shook his head. "Not one bit." She hesitated for a moment, eyes flicking toward the barn. "The saddle. It broke." Tate frowned. "Broke? Already?" She shook her head quickly. "No, not the leather. Just the strap. I think I tightened it wrong." She paused, lowering her gaze. "Thought maybe you could help me fix it." He nodded toward the barn. "Bring it in." Inside, the air smelled of hay and oil. Dust floated in the golden light cutting through the wooden slats. Tate took the saddle gently from her hands and placed it on the bench. His fingers traced the torn strap, and he chuckled softly. "You didn't tighten it wrong," he said. "It just needed an extra hole punched through. That's all." She laughed, that same small, sweet laugh that had stayed in his head for weeks. "Guess I'm not much of a rancher after all." "You did fine," he said, glancing up. "Better than most." There was silence then, the kind that didn't need filling. He worked carefully, fixing the strap, while she wandered through the barn, touching old tools and saddles like they were pieces of another life. Finally, she spoke again. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked quietly. He looked up. "Leaving?" She nodded. "You've got all this land, all this sky, but no one to share it with. Doesn't that ever get lonely?" Tate took a slow breath. "Sometimes. But I guess I made peace with it. The land keeps me company. The horses talk more than most folks I know." She smiled. "That sounds like something my father would have said." He fixed the strap, tightened it, and handed her the saddle. "There. Good as new." She took it, but didn't move to leave. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him. "You know," she said softly. "He used to say that some things in life aren't meant to fit easy. You gotta make room for them. Stretch a little. Take a chance." Tate met her eyes. "You think he was right?" "I think." She hesitated, her fingers brushing the leather strap. "I think maybe I came here to find out." The barn went silent except for the creak of wood and the slow rhythm of their breaths. Outside, the sun melted into the horizon, painting everything in orange and gold. Tate stepped closer, not too close, but enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You staying the night?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then smiled. "If it fits." Tate froze for a heartbeat. Then laughed. The kind of laugh that only comes when something deep inside finally lets go. "It'll fit just fine," he said. And this time, it wasn't about the saddle. They talked long into the night, about her father, about the road. About dreams half-lived and chances never taken. She told him how she'd been running from the idea of home ever since she lost hers. How every place felt too small to hold her grief. And somehow, in the quiet of that barn, surrounded by the scent of leather and hay, she realized she didn't feel that way anymore. Tate didn't try to fix her pain. He just listened, like the land itself, patient and steady. When she grew quiet, he said, "Sometimes the things we think are too small for us are exactly the ones that fit right." Tears glimmered in her eyes. She nodded, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled like she meant it. When morning came, the ranch looked the same, but something had changed. The wagon stayed by the fence. The mule grazed lazily in the grass. And the woman. She stayed too. Days turned into weeks again. She helped Tate mend fences, feed the horses, plant winter hay. The ranch began to breathe again, laughter in the kitchen. Music on the porch, 2 cups instead of 1. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And every evening, as the sun dipped low, Tate would look at her and remember that first day, her question, his answer. And how everything began with something that almost didn't fit. One night, as they stood watching the stars spill across the prairie sky, she leaned into him and whispered, "You ever think maybe things happen for a reason?" Tate smiled, tipping his hat back. "Yeah," he said. "I think sometimes, the good Lord just knows what fits, even when we don't." She laughed softly and laid her head on his shoulder. The wind moved through the fields, carrying the scent of sage and hope. And in that quiet moment, under that endless sky, everything finally fit, just fine.